Then they showed a diagram.
Northern
How you
southern
use
part.
the grabber up here with
There's
the
13
left
different
hand.
languages.
And then I don't seem to get it good.
That's because like with that, he need to use it for years now.
The ones I wanted, I took having copies.
Raised on fire.
I guess, I hate, I don't know if you ought to call it, maybe if you don't have any common sense or fearlessness after that. Anyone that would volunteer for something like Merrill Marauders has to be someone different.
It's all right.
I don't know,
Thanks.
but pick 'em on. Anyway, he tells me he was originally from Osage in the Charles City area, and immediately after Pearl Harbor, I'm not sure how soon, he ended up joining the military, and the 1942, I believe, and he said he signed up to go with the OSS. That's the predecessor, I guess, of the CIA. And then in the fall of 43, they organized the special group, very similar to today. We hear a lot about these in connection with the Rangers and so on. It's basic, I guess, strategy of the modern army. And anyway, he signed up for it, and in 1944, they ended up going into the Orient. After he got out of the service, he ended up finishing his degree and taught several places. He first came to Fort Dodge because he wanted to teach in the graduate school, and from 1968 to 1975, he was with St. Ed's, and then I left there and went down to Stratford. And he doesn't remember this, but that's when I had the first contact with him. He took 13 years down in Stratford. I guess he taught for a total of 23 years. Then he went back to nurses training. It was too tough. He's Merrill, I don't know what that says about the Rangers and Merrill. You can't take it. Anyway, with that, I'll just turn it over to him.
Okay, anytime you want to leave, why just feel free to get up and go. When Roger from the library here asked George Lundgren of the Fort Dodge Golden Kiwanis that he wished to have as many veterans as possible write their memories of their service, I couldn't decide what to write about or what was wanted. I had given a program of the Merrill's Marauder Rangers to the Golden Kiwanis. Several of the members said that I should write about my memories, so I decided to write some of them of the 307 Composite unit, Provisional. I wrote most of these items in terms of we, us, our, them, and those, and they instead of I, because we were all a team. Instead, I wrote about incidents and anecdotes about people and things that had happened. I attempted to write about the 2nd Battalion of the old Marauders and the 2nd Battalion of the new Marauders, which is something that most people didn't know about. Also, stories of all 3 of the battalions put together. I didn't take notes because, as most of you fellows who are in service knew, that you weren't allowed to take notes or have addresses or diaries or anything on you, because if you were captured or killed, the enemy could take these and write home and ask for money from your parents. And that did happen in our theater, where there were some fellows that were captured or that had been killed, and they got a hold of their dog tags or notes that they had in their pocket and wrote home wrote home to their parents and got money telling them that they would knew where their sons were or what happened to them and so on. So we were told that, in fact, if they told us if you were in attack, you thought you were going to get killed or something, put your dog tags in your mouth. So when you were killed, your jaws would set and the dog tags would be in your mouth. I never saw the necessity to do that, but it was all right. Okay, some of the books that have been written, you saw this, the Ranger, Merrill's Marauders, and below it here it says, Sua Sponte. This is a letter that I got from another Ranger who's our secretary of our organization. Incidentally, this garb that I'm wearing wasn't what we wore in Burma. This is what we wear when we have our annual reunion. Sponte means of their own accord. He said, you will remember that we were unusual in that we were all volunteers for a dangerous, hazardous mission. So today's Rangers are also volunteers, which they are. When he mentioned the Merrill's Marauders, he said, and that was when Strucker, Jeff Strucker was here. He was a Ranger. Now he talked one night up at Starlight, I believe, and he came here through the auspices of the Christian Community School. And I talked to his mother-in-law, and she said that he's in the Army now and is a chaplain, and he's in Iraq. He said when he was here, did you immediately jump to your feet and say something like, right on, you said it. The Rangers today say something like, hoo-ah! I don't think there's a correct spelling. They just yell it out when they think it's appropriate. When the Rangers write to somebody, they end the letter with, Rangers lead the way, or RLTW. He says, I am too bashful to do that myself, but I will end this note now having just said it. Also, we also say, and this was adopted by our army in Iraq, we leave no man behind. That was originated with our Ranger outfit. We never left a man behind, ever, ever. And they had the same slogan too in our army in Iraq. Also, as I go through this, you will notice that our campaign was just about like the campaign in Iraq, except that we were on foot and they were riding tanks and Humvees. But we would take a village, hit it hard, and go way around 2,500 miles on, hit another village, and wait for the Chinese to follow us up, and the engineers to build a little road, and the Chinese to mop up behind us. So that's about the way they had the campaign in Iraq today. Okay, I volunteered for the Navy Air Corps V-12 program and wasn't selected to go on the first go-around. My number came up and I was sent to the Infantry Casualty Replacement Program at Camp Walters, Texas. During my basic, I was notified that I was now selected for the Navy 2 program, V-12 program. The Army said, no, when you finish this basic training, you can take the Army Air Corps test. I finished the next one, basic training course in the infantry. I was picked for the cavalry, but I took the Army Air Corps test, passed, and was sent to Shepherd Field, Texas. I washed out of pilot training in primary. They told me I had a good gunnery score and could be a tail gunner. My answer was send me to the hottest unit in the United States Army that was organizing for a strictly volunteer outfit. They did, and 2 months later I was going down the trail in Burma. I found out going overseas that I was going to the 503 Composite Provisional Unit. Okay, that sounds good, don't it? This didn't sound very much like a unit that one would volunteer for. Later, when we were going down the trail, a reporter called us Merrill's Marauders, after our beloved General Frank Merrill. We'd now been designated as the nucleus of the 75th Ranger Regiment by the Pentagon. This was because of our long-range penetration behind enemy lines in Burma. They wear our insignia and shoulder patch today. The motto of the Rangers, "We lead the way." The Merrill's Marauders slogan was, "We leave no man behind." The purpose was to clean out northern Burma from the Japanese. They were surrounding the British forces at Imphal, India. I wish I would have brought some maps. This was way up in northern Burma on the borders of India. If the Japs broke through, they could hook up with the Axis in Europe. Another reason was to build a road from Lido, India, to Lashio, down in southern Burma, near China, to ship supplies to the Chinese, to fight the Japs in China by hooking up with the old Burma Road. Another purpose was to secure our Air Force bases, for our Air Force to bomb China and send fighter planes from the bases captured from the Japanese. Vinegar Joe Still was our amateur general, located in Calcutta. He had been run out of China and Burma several years previous and vowed he would be back. From now on, I'm going to refer to we and our and they instead of I. Everything everyone did was a team effort all the way. All of this was a result of the Quebec Conference. Lawrence of Arabia's battle techniques were considered, as well as Wingate of the famous Wingate Raiders. They were long-range penetrators behind enemy lines. We were a hit-and-run unit, more offense than defense. General Merrill asked for 3 battalions to volunteer for dangerous missions. He got 1,000 from Panama and Trinidad. Most of these men were in prison. If they lived, they would receive their pay, get their citizenship back, and honorable discharge and military benefits. They were called misfits. Now, I really resented this because they were well trained in jungle combat, all brave men. I had several in my squad when I was a squad leader. Several of them were squad leaders themselves. We depended on them, and they depended on us. True, some had been on the weed, and it had affected their mental capabilities, but they were dependable and responsible men. There was another 1,000 tested veterans from the South Pacific who had been in rough battles in Guadalcanal. They were 1,000 of us rookies. We learned fast. General Stilwell would not lend his best Chinese officers to General Merrill. He kept them to mop up after our battles as we marched on south. And this now sounds like the campaign in Iraq. Also, he kept them to fight in China. Mountbatten was the theater commander. General Wingate and his officers gave us our jungle training. General Stilwell opposed being under Wingate. Mountbatten then took Merrill's Marauders from Wingate and gave them to Stilwell. Kind of like musical chairs. General Merrill was with General Stilwell on the retreat out of Burma to India. He was not a spit and polish officer. His officers loved him, or his troops loved him. He was a leader, not a pusher. He approved of General Wingate organizing the Marauders into 3 battalions, divided into 2 color combat teams of 500 men each. That's 2 in each battalion, 2 color combat teams of 500 each, because that make 1,000 men per battalion, and there were 3 battalions. So it's been 3,000 total. The 1st battalion was red and white, the 2nd battalion blue and green, the 3rd battalion orange and khaki. Colonel Hunter was second in command to General Merrill. Stillwell did not like Colonel Hunter, and it was very noticeable to the troops. Go politics here. This made 6 teams of 500 men each. We did not get the mules we needed in time. Only 400 of the 1,000 made it. The rest drowned when the ship was torpedoed off the coast of Ceylon on Christmas Day. They replaced them with scrawny, sick horses from Tibet. The veterinarians and farm boys went after them. Many had to be broke after we got them back. A few beautiful horses from India were also acquired. We were now ready to start down the trail, the land of wild animals, leeches, mosquitoes, snakes, malaria, typhus, maybe dysentery, and Japs. And beautiful no, that was in there. As we headed down the trail, no records were kept, or those that were made were lost. Stillwell said there would be no promotions or records and no commendations or medals, except some were awarded to headquarters in Calcutta and some field officers. We were all volunteers, including the replacements. That's why General Stillwell said, we had volunteers, and that's what you got. He said there were no promises, no guarantees. Many parents did not hear of their son's death until later. The field officers had turned them in. They were not recorded or passed on to headquarters in Calcutta. Many parents learned of their son's death and how it happened from their buddies who wrote to them. We fought against the Japanese 18th Imperial Marine Divisions, victors of Malaysia and Singapore. The first part of the 700-mile trip was over a mountain pass, then under tall trees 80 feet high with a green canopy over the top. And these trees were 20 feet in diameter. They were called banyan trees. Then through the lowlands full of vines and bamboo, which we cut through with machetes. Our clothes were damp all the time. This was the beginning of our long trek. We now hiked to Shimbawang, going down the Hokong Valley to Mingklong, and our first objective, Wallaboom. We were supplied by an airdrop our first 10-in-1 ration. That's for a squad, a little box, and the squad, all of us, had a meal in those. Some of them were a little larger so that you could get 3 meals out of them. Sometimes you even stretched them so that one box would last your whole squad for 3 days. The Japs had 5 battalions, which would be 5,000 men at Wallaboom. Our objective was to move around this Japanese division and destroy everything of military value. The purpose was to keep the Japs moving south all the time from up around Imphal, India, down toward Myitkyina. They didn't want to do this. This messed up their campaign. They wanted to be up and take Imphal, India, and hook up with the Germans. But this caused them to move south down toward Myitkyina. The purpose was to keep the Japs moving south to free the north. We would bypass and attack 25 to 100 miles south of the Japanese in the north who would come to help them. So we would hit a village, have a circus, hit and run, and move on to the next one, 20 to 100 miles further on, and wait for the Chinese to mop up behind us. We were told to get rid of everything except our ponchos, ammunition, weapons, our medical kit, and 5 days of rations. That's all we had. We didn't have all that big thing bundle on our back and all these vests and all, everything that they had today. The purpose was to keep the Japs moving south to free the north. We were told the Chinese who were supposed to mop up behind us got bogged down and were not available. When we got close to Wallaboom, it was a command post, railroad junction, oil tanks, huge oil tanks. I don't know, must have been 30 of those big tanks. It was an ammo dump, had a lot of trucks, and it was a road junction. Lieutenant Weston and Grissom had surrounded Wallaboom and set up ambushes. Weston was first to contact the enemy. We learned our first lesson. We were to give 2 successive shots and wait. 2 successive shots were fired back, as was the signal. We stepped forward and were welcoming the Chinese. They opened fire on us. They were Japs. This lesson was, know your enemy. Weston heard the shots and moved south when he was caught in an ambush. The first marauder, Robert Landis, was killed. They were surrounded. Weston got on a beautiful black horse, one of them they brought from India, and rode for 25 miles to Colonel Hunter's headquarters because the radios were all shot up in the ambush. A little story, when he was crossing a little ravine, a little cobra raised up in front of the horse and spooked him, and it threw Weston off. And, he got out of the creek, and the horse waited on the other side. It was a blessing, and he got on him, and the mail had gotten through. The main body got through and ambushed the Japanese. In the Battle of Wallaboom, 800 Japs were killed. 8 Americans were killed, and 40 wounded. LS, as they call them, that was really the little L5s, would cut clearances in the jungle. It didn't take a bunch of guys long to do that. They would land, pick up the wounded, and take them out. They come up and picked up the wounded then. Planes dropped much needed ammunition, food, and clothing for us, and grain for the mules. We got out of several ambushes, and that skirmish as did the main body. We were all trained for ambushes. In an ambush, it's when you're going down the trail, say the Japs got on each side of you, and as you went down through the middle, maybe the scout signal, all's clear, and told you to come ahead. Then they would fire on you and wipe out your squad or unit, whatever it was. Now, if you could withdraw and go way around and just forget that fight and go about 15, 20 miles way on around them toward another village or another objective. But say that you didn't want to move to a new location, you wanted to take them out. So while the trail was here and you were supposedly here and the enemy was on each side of you firing this way, then our scouts would go around and get just back of these Japanese and move in on them and wipe them out, and then we all moved on down the trail. That's how these ambushes work. The night of the ambushes, we were surrounded. If you had a bowel movement, you used your helmet. At one of the trail attacks, a scout was shot, and the Japs ran forward to bayonet him. He rolled over and killed 3 of them with his Tommy gun. When Werner took his men across the river, Jones, a Sioux Indian, spotted a Nambu gun on the opposite bank. He was an expert shot. He fired, and a Jap head rolled out of the thicket. He fired again, and the BAR man came up and helped him. When it was over, these 2 marauders had killed 60 Japs. At the day's end, Japs killed 80, Marauders 6. I like those kind of stats. On the 2nd Battalion roadblock on the Kaming Trail, see, now you got to get the picture. These 6 color black teams took different trails. And maybe one day this group would march 30 miles and attack. This group would wait 2 weeks and attack 100 miles down here. Over here, another group might wait, or the same day that the first group did, only they were way over here on another trail. 6 different trails that they were moving down, and they would attack. And the Japs just thought there were Americans spread clear across the jungle. Now, on the 2nd Battalion roadblock on the Kaming Trail, one of the engineers found a telephone line. Tech Fort Mansumato, a Nisi American, tapped the line and found it went to Japanese headquarters. The Japanese wanted more men and ammunition. The answer came back, no help, fight to the end, then banzai. The Americans were out of everything. Well, you know what happened to them then. We were out of everything, food and everything, so the British units gave us food. As they started out down the trail, we found it was booby trapped. So we drove a mule in front of them, and we lost several mules. The Japanese across the trail on the other side of Wallaboom were attacking, so one marauder knew that the Japs tried to spook the Americans with banzai yells. Banzai yells are where the Japanese all had marijuana and everything you can think of, all kind of drugs in their belts, and they would get all hopped up and do a lot of screaming and yelling and then come at you. They didn't care how much you fired at them or anything. They just kept coming and coming. You had to kill the guy to stop him. Now he knew that the Japs tried to spook the Americans with banzai yells. Now he started up the wolf howl. Then all the Americans caught on, and in unison, all up and down the line for a quarter of a mile, a loud, long, mournful wolf howl. This spooked the Japs, and they quit firing. We found out they were very superstitious people. That night, 3rd Battalion took the brunt of the attack. They grouped all the Marauders on the vulnerable side. The Japs banzaied with machine guns, namboos, grenades in the only opening. And 40 yards away, 400 Marauders' guns opened up. The Japs pulled charge after charge. The Marauder 50 caliber machine guns, water jackets were full of holes, and the barrels were getting hot. So the men dumped their canteens into the water jackets to keep it firing. After the water was all gone, we had no alternative but to urinate in our canteen cups and pour that in the water jackets. When all was over, 350 Japs lay in the clearing. 2,500 Marauders were now left for the next objective, which was Shadazoo. The Marauders had destroyed all military equipment. They had the Hokong Valley. Now Stilwell wanted the Mokong Valley. Once more, the Marauders were moving south, going around back of the Japs, causing them to fall back. Shadazoo was about 50 miles away. A 5-day hike. To keep from being seen, the Japs' 2nd Battalion was wading in streams and rivers. The troops had now been on the trail for 8 weeks. To get to Ingwatang, they had to cut through the jungle and rice paddies. Stilwell ordered the unit to do the impossible, without food, water, or ammunition. I didn't know I could throw a grenade that far. This was the case on the march to Shadazoo. We did not go on the trails or roads, but cut our way through the jungle, foot by foot. We were out of food, as we would have spotted, and we would have been spotted by the Japs when we got the airdrops. The Japs were very near, so we had to stay in the rice paddies and the jungles and disregard the airdrops. That was awful. 4 roadblocks were set after we emerged from the jungle when we hit the railroad. The objective was an ammo dump, a fuel dump, and a rail junction. We hit with such great surprise, our kill was 20 to 1. By now we were completely exhausted. We were immediately ordered to our next objective, which was another 82-mile hike. The Marauders were staggering, shell-shocked, and snapped nerves, but still kept marching and fighting. Merrill said, just keep putting one foot ahead of the other, one step at a time. Can't beat it. The next objective was Napunga. The ridge going to Napunga was very narrow, room enough for only one man. It took 4 hours to go 4 miles. Artillery was firing at them on these mountain ledges. When the men reached the knoll of Napunga, they were exhausted. They were to hold Napunga by General Stilwell at all costs. There was a huge concentration of Japanese in the area of division strength of about 5,000. The Marauders set up a perimeter of 3 sides. Their water ran out. 75 of 200 mules were killed by their artillery. The dead mules polluted the water. The stench was unbearable. The Americans were holding a hill 2,800 feet in elevation. It commanded trails in all directions and 2 watersheds. The Americans were completely surrounded. Stillwell did not send the promised Chinese. The 3rd Battalion finally made the forced march from 100 miles away. They were to break through and extricate the 2nd Battalion. A hero again was Matsumoto, who crawled to the Jap position and heard their plans. The supply situation became worse. Airdrops of food, water, ammo helped, but much of it fell outside into the Japanese hands. Lieutenant McLogan, had us booby trap our foxholes and then pull out when the Japanese banzai and jumped in these foxholes. The booby traps blew up. And they thought they had driven us back up the hill. And we had done this on purpose. They continued their attack. The Americans waited until they were 15 yards away and opened up. Matsumoto shouted real loud and yelled, "Charge, charge, charge," in Japanese. And so they kept coming and coming and coming. After attack, they counted 50 dead Japs. At that time, the Americans had 17 dead and 97 wounded and 4 missing. The siege lasted 12 days. The Americans had called in the P-51 Mustangs, the 14th Air Force, to strafe and bomb the Japanese on the outside of the perimeter. At one time, when the Japanese artillery was causing so much damage, the Marauders called for a pack artillery. When it was dropped by C-47s, the mule skinners assembled them and fired them point blank down the hill at the Japanese. All of the Jap charges were repulsed because Matsumoto always knew where they were coming. The Americans would concentrate their fire at that one spot. A deadly hail of fire, they stacked up dead Japanese bodies each time. All were killed. On the 12th day of the siege, I believe it was the 3rd Battalion, looked like Ghost, had completed their 100-mile hike to relieve the siege. They attacked the Japs on all sides, so a small hole opened up and the Punga Marauders filed out. 1st Battalion also helped by a forced march of 100 miles and attacked the other side. Colonel Beach of the 3rd Battalion had his medics take out 100 men on litters. The new troops that moved in buried 400 dead Japs in the perimeter and many outside. The Americans had 50 killed and 300 wounded. The battle was over. It was a great success. Praise the Lord. We now got rest, food, water, and ammo. We took off our shoes. For some, it was the first time in 3 months, because if you took your shoes off, your feet would swell up and you couldn't get your shoes back on. Some of the guys cut 1/4 inch calluses off of the bottom of their feet. We now thought we were going home. All 3 battalions were in the area now. We'd all come together for all these 6 trails and campaign. Airdrops came for everyone, including mail. We were allowed to write 3 airmail letters each and mail them out. We had come 700 miles as a crow flies at this point. The Japanese thought we had an army of 20,000 men stretched all across northern Burma. This was because the 6 color combat teams going in different trails south and attacking at different times at different places. Still wanted Myitkyina because it was the northernmost defense base. A railroad from Rangoon, a navigation head of the Irrawaddy River, the airport for fighters and bombers to fly into China over the hump. Stillwell now against Merrill and all the doctors' advice ordered us to take the Myitkyina airport. It was 100 miles over a 6,500 foot pass. Stillwell wrote in his diary, Marauders okay. The 5307 was just the opposite. The Marauders felt Stillwell was sacrificing them on his own ambition. Headquarters did not like the men in the field. Merrill returned from his 2nd heart attack. Morale was bad. We had a mule race, but no one had any money to bet. We had close order drill to install discipline. It only made matters worse. Personally, I love field problems, but I hate close order drills like the plague. The plan to take Myitkyina was called Operation End Run. 25 men per day were being evacuated from malaria, typhus, and dysentery. I know I had a bug bite my foot, and so I went to the medics and they put me in a little tent for that night. And my foot swelled up in the morning. It was pretty good, but at the same time, I had a maybe dysentery pretty bad, and I can remember going out into the compound, and it just seemed like they're 1,000 miles away. I heard a couple of nurses walking across the compound. They said, "Look at that poor son of a, you know what's over there." The Marauders, at this point now, had lost 700 wounded, killed, or down with disease and bad nutrition. Leeches had given ulcerated sores. General Stillwell trusted only the Marauders to do the job. However, he never told them. It would have meant a lot to all of us. 3rd Battalion had lost 20 mules and 2 tons of equipment in one day on the trail. Many places there were no trails. You had to unload and reload the mules that couldn't make it up the hills. The Chinese were fighting now were 14, 15, and 16 years old kids and teens. They fought gallantly with poor weapons and not much training, but lots of guts and bravery. They fought seasoned Jap troops and killed 90 of them. Merrill had his 3rd heart attack, but kept going. We were now coming down with typhus, malaria, and dysentery. We cut slits in our fatigues so so we could march and squat, or go on, or we could keep firing while we were squirting. We had one thing in our favor. When we had our backs against the wall, we called the Mustangs in that strafed the Japs. The Mustangs came from the 14th Air Force under General Chenault and the famed Flame Tigers. The Marauders were in 2 columns going to Myitkyina. It took 2 weeks to make it to the airfield. Out of 3rd battalions, only a few hundred men could walk out of 3,000 starting from Lido. Still sent out the second message, Strawberry Sunday. Signal for both columns were nearing the airfield. Hunter's Kachin guide was bitten by a poisonous snake. His foot started swelling and he couldn't walk. And we were depending on him. He's the only one who knew the trail to get there. Lieutenant Dunlap and Captain Laughlin slashed the guide's foot and sucked out the poison of the wound for 2 hours. The swelling went down and he led the column again. The last message was in the rain. It meant the march to the airfield was on the way. That meant the troops would take the airfield and have it cleared for the C-46s and 47 to land troops and equipment. The transports were already loaded and heading for the airfield in Myitkyina. The Dakotas started unloading Chinese at the air base. However, the supplies force didn't arrive. Marauders were running out of food and water. The Chinese went to take the city of Myitkyina and got confused and ended up fighting each other with 50% casualties. Where were the supplies? Nowhere. Without telling the Marauders, General Stratemeyer had taken their supply line away from them. He was managing it himself, and food and water were at the bottom of his list. He was an Air Corps man. He was very clear that he was not very informed on infantry needs. The Japs didn't know to fortify the airstrip, so Hunter moved in. They had made a forced march, and Merrill flew back in, and then from his 3rd heart attack. Of the old Marauders outfit, only a few of 1st Battalion were left. They were out of ammo and food. When the 2nd and 3rd Battalion arrived, they formed a half ring around the city of Myitkyina. Stilwell flew in. Now the Chinese who beat each other up on the day before made the same mistake again. During the night, they were located on each side of the airstrip. The Japs moved back into the middle of the airstrip and started firing each way. Then they pulled back out. By morning, the Japanese had only half of their outfit left. General Merrill had another heart attack. There's the 4th one. I won't read that. The Japanese brought in reinforcements from the south on the Irrawaddy River. The Myitkyina Jap garrison was 4,000. 4,000 more came in. That made them around, with their non-combatants, about 10,000. And they were told to hold at all costs. The Japs' big mistake that they now thought American forces converged on them was about 30,000. Otherwise, we actually had only 10% of that number, about 300. They could have went right through us. The lines around the city were very thin, one man to a foxhole, which were wide apart. We didn't have any tanks, only 14 artillery pieces, and with all the engineers, the Chinese and so forth, we only had about 1,240 in the old Marauders and the new Marauders in the whole area there. The Japs took back two of the important positions. The Chinese finally arrived. Only 1,310 Marauders reached the airfield and were evacuating 100 a day. The reversal of circumstances was a call out to all the walking wounded in the hospitals. Only 50 answered and came back. The 209th Combat Engineers joined Company C attached to the Marauders. Marauders were in such bad shape they fell asleep firing their guns. McGee had a temperature of 103, fainted 3 times during the attack. Hunter ordered the 2nd Battalion back to the airstrip. The untested engineers faced the Japs' experienced soldiers. There was finally only 300 men left at Myitkyina. A new call went out by General Marshall for another 3 battalions, and these were called the New Marauders, and they came from the States, and since the first 3,000 did such a good job, they figured they'd go back to the same sources and get this different men, but from the same sources again. So of these the first 3,000 and the first 1,000 came from Panama and Trinidad, and the other 1,000 came from the Pacific again, from Guadalcanal, who were yellow from atabrine and malaria, but they were seasonal soldiers. The ones from Panama and Trinidad were from the prisons and stockades again. They were in for murder, drugs, fighting, stealing, rape. Most were lifers. If they lived, they would get their citizenship back, start drawing pay and their freedom. These men were trained in jungle warfare and were excellent soldiers. When I joined the New Marauders, I wasn't old ones, so I joined these new ones that came from the state. My squad leader was in for killing a man in a fight. He was great, Red Pierce. He had big dragons tattooed on his chest. They were green and gray and red. Tongues of the dragon, were red. And when he sweated and flexed his muscles, why, these dragons would move. He was killed by friendly fire when he came in from a forward position and gave the signal to his soldiers, a baker. These men were put there. Stilwell said, everybody goes up on the line. And so they put this baker up on the line, and he got spooked and shot red in the stomach 8 times. And they put him up there because he had corporal stripes, or the PFCs, so he was appointed a leader, but he was a baker. He didn't know anything about infantry. As they did at that time, they gave him a carton of cigarettes and transferred him. I was head scout of 2nd Battalion along with Tom Garland from Texas, and then when we got on the line, was made squad leader in Company F Battalion. We made patrols and fought skirmishes every day against the Japs. Some of the old hands claimed that the New Marauders had gotten their training coming in on the plane. That was not true. These men were not of the older, not older, but older in being of the original Marauders who stayed and fought in Myitkyina. Those of us who stayed realized that the men from Guadalcanal, also Trinidad, had more experience in line fighting, attacking day after day, and had more experience in this than the Marauders. It it didn't bother me because I had been trained in infantry casualty replacement centers, and we were trained with every weapon and every field operation there was. Also from the battalion from Panama and Trinidad had years of jungle training. They were called misfits, and again, many of these guys had been using drugs, and that's why they were in prison, and some of them brains were cooked. They got killed during the first attacks, as many of the old Marauders did, who did not know how to fight offensively on a front line and were not able to hit and run like we did before. At this time, the Japanese knew that they were going to die, commit suicide, or be taken prisoner. Up to this time, we took no prisoners. If you captured one, the captain would tell you to take him to headquarters, a half-mile away, and be back in 3 minutes. If the Chinese were around, you could turn them over to them, would interrogate them, then put a grenade in their mouth, back off about 50 feet after a string had been tied to the pin and pulled. The Japanese had 8,000 killed and 400 captured at Myitkyina and 1,200 wounded, and about 1,000 escaped down the Irrawaddy River. It was in monsoon time, and the river was higher than the Des Moines is today, and so I don't think too many of that 1,000 made it going down the river. The volunteer replacements were the ones who took the city and should be credited with the victory. It took 4 months during the monsoon weather. Colonel Hunter wrote a scathing report charging Stilwell and his staff with callous indifference and long-standing hostilities toward the Marauders. Stillwell was called to Washington to answer the charge, and instead got his 4th star, and Hunter got a slow boat home. None of us got promotions or medals except some officers. Even all of the wounded or killed got Purple Hearts a year or so later. If you come in as a private, you left as a PFC on your discharge. I was a battalion scout, squad leader, platoon leader, all as a PFC. However, the medals that I did get come back as a tech sergeant. But when headquarters in Calcutta got a hold of it, I kind of moved things around. It was not hard to move to these positions. They emptied daily. Captain Maxon put me into the Silver Star and saw that I got it. It was for getting a wounded man off the battlefield under heavy fire. The wounded soldier was about 6'2" and weighed about 180 pounds. He was the squad's BAR man. He kept saying, "Lord, he saved me. Lord, he saved me." I always thought that I was pretty good at saving him. As I grew older, I realized he asked God to save him. God only used me as a tool to answer his prayers. I got the Bronze Star, and Johnny Albert's got the silver. We captured a strategic pillbox. Large rooms were under banyan tree. The opening was in the rear of this big rooms under there. Teakwood log was overhead, about 4 inches off the ground with a slit in front for the machine guns to fire out of. After we captured it, instead of battalion, we stayed in it, the 2 of us, and held it for 2 days. Then battalion headquarters called our captain and said, "We told you to get those guys back online." And so they called us back reluctantly. Many soldiers were killed trying to take it back again. Finally, it had to be bombed. Johnny Albert was later killed. He received his medal posthumously. When Captain Maxon asked Stilwell to present us the medals, there was hesitation. Captain Maxon told him these were the 2 battalion scouts who volunteered to take you through enemy lines. And so he came across. On the 4th of July, 1944, we were ordered to start firing on the bank of the Irrawaddy River. I started firing at 4 a.m. We were not to attack. We fired all along the line for an hour. During the month of June, the Japs saw me as the person commanding on the line of Company F. During our firing, the Japs had my hole zeroed in. They walked the mortar rounds right up to my hole. A piece of shrapnel hit me in the orifice of my eye and lodged in the facial bone behind my eye. Captain Maxson evacuated me, and he also was getting evacuated then too. And so, since I was a walking wounded, we were being evacuated by ox cart, the wounded, and so they called me a walking wounded guard on the way back. It was a political war as far as governments were concerned, and also the generals. Stilwell was jealous and envious of Wingate. Wingate was an Englishman. There was General Chennault of the Flying Tigers, who didn't get parts for the planes to fly. General Merrill, who was always belittled by General Stilwell, and also Wingate was belittled by him. Wingate was killed in an airplane crash, if you recall. All field generals. On the other side was your Pentagon and Stilwell. In the middle was General Cheyenne Cachette. Stillwell came out on top and got the 4th star. Stillwell concluded in his diary, in his self-centered, egotistical, arrogant manner, he says, I think in a self-pity way, he wrote for himself, the nervous wear and tear is terrible. Pity me, the commanding officer. I'd say that was, there's some term for it. After I got out of the 20th General Hospital, I went back to Camp Landis and trained for the Mars Task Force. Now the Mars Task Force was made up 3rd Battalion, Old and New Marauders, the healthy from the 28th Cavalry Division, 22nd and 28th Chinese divisions, and the British 36th. We went from Myitkyina, which was halfway between in Burma, 600 more miles. It took about the same length of time to go down to Lashio and Bamo on the border of China, and hooked up the Lido Road to the Burma Road that went into China. We could now ship equipment from Lido, India to China to finish the fight in victory for Japan. After the war ended, on the 15th of August, 1945, the Chinese communists started moving down on the Chinese nationalists who were under General Cheyenne Cachette. The nationalists helped the Marauders in their victory over the Japanese in Burma. After being assigned to a depot in Burma, I rode shotgun into China with convoys. Then we were assigned to guard these stockpiles of automotive stuff and guns and supplies of all kinds. So we had several firefights with the Chinese communists. When General Marshall and Secretary of State Dean Acheson came to China and viewed Mao Zedong's and Zhou Enlai's troops instead of Cheyenne Cachette's troops, I decided it was time to find them, ride back home to the United States. If you took a step in either direction, you were headed home. And I would volunteer again. Okay. Any questions?
Have you ever gone back?
No. A group went back, and they got to go to China and India. But when they got on the border of Burma, the new communist government in Burma would not let them in. But one person who did get in, a newsman, said that when we went back, that the old Lido Road was all growing over. But all it's good for is for the ox carts to go down through there. But the Burma Road is still open, and they're still using that in China. I did sign up about, I don't know how many years ago it was, you probably remember, when they had the massacre in China. I had signed up to go to China for teaching English. And Mrs. Lamb was the head of that organization, English teaching in China. And she wrote a letter and said, forget it. It'll be quite a few years before we will okay that. Although my neighbor now is Jenny Martin. And she's been in China now, way up at Whole Pot. And she's been teaching English up there now for a couple of years. If you followed her on the computer way, there's some rough times going on there.
Any last questions, then we can talk to them over coffee.